Greetings, my name is Keith Davis. I'm here at the place where we have the Fayetteville chapter of After America meetings every month. And today I'm going to talk to you about why the Islamists, to include ISIS, Boko Haram, and the Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula, are actually Islamic. There are many people who have opinions about whether or not these groups are Islamic or they're not Islamic. But the way to really find out if somebody is following their doctrine is to look at their doctrine. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. But before we do, let me give you a sample of what most Western politicians say about groups like ISIS.
They are killing and slaughtering thousands of people, Muslims, Christians, minorities across Iraq and Syria. They boast of their brutality. They claim to do this in the name of Islam. That is nonsense. Islam is a religion of peace. They are not Muslims, they are monsters.
They are monsters. That is true. No one can deny that they are monsters. But are they or are they not Muslims practicing Islamic doctrine as written in the Islamic scriptures? Today we're going to discuss that. And first I want you to understand 4 basic principles. First, the Islamists believe that they're obeying the God and that they're following the example of Muhammad. This makes their work holy. Secondly, the Islamists are going to fight the last man's death because they love death more than we love life. Third, they are authorized to lie. And what that can mean is they will befriend people, but lie, join militaries, even lie to the people around them within their own militaries, and then when they get the opportunity, that's when they kill Americans. That's how we have the Afghan and Iraqi soldiers killing Americans overseas, because they have lied to gain access and then conduct attacks in the name of Allah. We'll talk about why they do that later. And finally, this is a generational war. The first war the United States ever fought off our shores was against the Islamists in the Barbary coasts. And it took force to stop them from kidnapping people and killing people and conducting extortion. But before we go any further, I want to explain very clearly the people about whom we are talking today. We're not talking about all Muslims because, like most religions, Muslims believe portions of their religion as they see fit. So today we are going to talk about what I refer to as Islamists. And Islamists are tightly defined as those Muslims who wish to see Islam and Islamic law, called Sharia law, rule over every other legal system, because every other legal system is a man-made government which is inferior to a God-ordained Sharia law. These people also want Islam to be the supreme religion in the world and will fight until all religions fall under Islam. But first we're going to talk about the Islamic scriptures. When most Americans think of the Christian scriptures, they think of the Bible. This is the Holy Scriptures for Christians. Anything beyond this book is simply a commentary. And it's nice, but this is the scripture. Likewise, when most Americans think of Islamic scriptures, they think of this book, the Quran. And they think that this is the entirety of Islamic scripture. Today we're going to learn that that is not the case by a long shot. First we're going to talk about the Quran itself. It was actually not collected and consolidated until the 3rd Caliph after Muhammad had died. And so they actually said parts that they didn't want to include, they left out. It was broken into 114 chapters. So we're going to talk a little bit about how those chapters are broken down and when they were written and how that becomes very important. In fact, 90 of them were written while in Mecca. And when Muhammad was in Mecca, he was trying to win converts and trying to correlate Islam with Christianity and Judaism. And so a lot of the first 90 surahs or chapters are very akin to Christianity and Judaism. However, once he was forced to flee to Medina because he had told all the Meccans that they were all going to die and go to hell, and all their ancestors were already in hell and suffering, and they had had enough, and they asked him very politely to leave or die, and he went to Medina, and the tone changed. We're going to talk about that and why that's really important to know. The second book we're going to talk about is called The Life of Muhammad. It's also called the Sirah. It's significantly thicker than the Quran. And if you can imagine, this is a biography. And a lot of times, what's in this 900-page book is a narrative that as you read through and you see what happened, and you see that the apostle had chosen one of the women as a wife for himself. Actually, in this case, he had chosen a woman as a slave. A lot of times what happens in here correlates directly to one of the Quranic verses. And so you understand what the verse means in the Quran by knowing the life of Muhammad. It was written roughly 760 AD, which means it was written roughly 130 years after Muhammad died. But that was the closest document written after Muhammad died. We talked about the 90 surahs written while in Mecca, and the 24 surahs written while in Medina. And here's how they break down. Now you'll notice I've got a black number 1 through 114, but I've got blue numbers that are just all over the place, and the red numbers that are all over the place. And so to understand this, when the Quran was collected, it was collected longest chapters up front, shortest ones in the back. So if you were to start reading the front of this book and read all the way to the back, you would not be reading a chronological recording. Like in the Bible, for the most part, Genesis is the beginning of time, Revelation is the end of time. There's some bouncing, but generally speaking, it's chronological. You can understand and follow the flow of time. The Quran's not written that way. To understand the Quran, you need to know in which order they were written. Now, an interesting point. In 622, when Muhammad had to leave Mecca for Medina, that's when the Islamic calendar starts. In the rest of the world, the calendar starts and time is tracked differently from when Christ was born, when he began his life, not when he was crucified. In Islam, the calendar starts when they had to flee Mecca, go to Medina, and their lives changed dramatically. The other books we need to understand fully are called the Hadith and the Classic Manual of Islamic Sacred Law. We'll start with the Hadith. This is what Muhammad said. It was written roughly 200 years after Muhammad died. The first one was by a man named Bukhari. He wrote 9 volumes of text. It is considered the most authoritative hadith. And if it's in here, it's just as viable as if it's in the Quran. And so when you hear people quoting Muhammad, it's probably not in the Quran. They're probably quoting the hadith. And that to them is as valid a Islamic scripture as the Quran is. Other hadiths came later. Shortly later, Sahih Muslim wrote a 7-volume set. These two, Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, are the two hadiths that nearly universally all Muslims believe are accurate and can be relied upon for making decisions on how to live and how to behave. And we'll see them quoted a lot today. The next one that was written was by a man named Sunan al-Dawud. He wrote it shortly after the first two wrote theirs. His is shorter, it's 5 volumes. We have 9, and then 7, and 5. But all of them went through hundreds of thousands of stories to get the ones they felt were most authentic. Now keep in mind, these were written 200 years after Muhammad died, and it was literally word of mouth passed down for 200 years that made it into this book as authoritative. And finally, the last book we talk about today is called The Reliance of the Traveler. In essence, this takes what is in the Sirah, which is the life of Muhammad, and it combines it with the Hadith, what Muhammad said. So what Muhammad did is in the Sirah, what Muhammad said is in the Hadith, and then in the Quran we have what Muhammad received. This book takes all of those together, and in essence it's a law book. It tells you how to live, how to behave, when retribution and retaliation is required, when it's not, when to conduct jihad, when not to, how to conduct financial business. This is in essence a law book written in 1360. So one last time, when we talk about Islamic scriptures, you'll hear a lot today about the Quran and the Sunnah. The Sunnah is a combination of the Sirah, the life of Muhammad, and the collections of what Muhammad said in the Hadith. So you'll hear the word Sunnah. Sunnah is a collection of the Hadith and the Sirah put together. And as we look at their holy scriptures, again, you and I always thought that the Quran was the whole scriptures. As we look at it big picture, we realize that the Quran really is a really small part. And so it's really important for you and I to understand what those other two parts are, what they say, and how we should understand their guiding of the Islamists today. We talked about some foundational principles out of Islam. The first one really is the most important. It is obey Muhammad and follow his example. And it's obey, it's not simply follow. There are four basic methods that the Quran uses to tell people to obey Muhammad. The first method is through example. There are stories, countless stories of prophets that said, I am from Allah, I am from God, obey me and fear God. And it includes Noah. When Noah was alive, Noah said, I'm a prophet from God, obey God, fear God, and obey me, and you will be saved. And of course, we all know that no one listened to Noah, and they all died. Likewise, the story of Moses, saying, fear God, obey me, to the Egyptians. They did not, and their firstborn were all killed. The second method is giving the carrot and stick principle. If you obey Muhammad, good things will happen to you. If you disobey, bad things will happen to you. And Quran 4:13-14 is a great example. Those who obey Allah and his messenger are admitted to the gardens, going to heaven. Those who disobey will be admitted to fire. They're going to hell. Third principle is critical to understanding the Islamist mindset. You are to obey Muhammad without question. In fact, it even says in Quran 33:36, and it says it again in 4:65, when a matter has been decided by Muhammad and his messenger, it is not fitting for a believer to have any opinion about the decision. Therefore, if it's in the Hadith, in the Sirah, which together make the Sunnah, if it's in the Sunnah or in the Quran, and you are directed to do something, you do not have an opinion. You must obey. The last one is the one that we're going to turn to a lot today. It is Muhammad is the excellent exemplar for the faithful. So, if Muhammad said it, or if Muhammad did it, you not only can do it, you not only should do it, you must do it as part of your obedience to Muhammad and Allah. Therefore, knowing what Muhammad said in the Hadith and what Muhammad did in the Sirah are just as important to knowing what Muhammad received in the Quran. And that's why understanding the scriptures is so critically important for Islam. The next thing we're going to learn about is a principle called abrogation. Don't worry about what I said before. Listen to what I'm saying now. Just like in the Bible, Jesus came And we no longer had to conduct sacrifices of animals because Jesus paid the price. And therefore, the New Testament with the gospel abrogated the Old Testament with the sacrifices. Likewise, Muslims believe that the Quran abrogated the Gospels. And just as importantly, within the Quran, there's a principle of abrogation. And this came about because as Quran revelations came out one at a time, occasionally a new revelation would come out and it contradicted an earlier revelation. And the Jews and the Christians in Mecca caught on to that pretty quickly. And they started grabbing Muhammad and saying, hey, how come you keep changing your mind? And here's why. Because again, during Muhammad's first 12 years, he was trying to win the hearts and minds. He was trying to get converts. But when that did not work, and he left Mecca with 150 followers or less, and they started starving when they went to Medina, he then realized he had to start conducting raids on caravans. As he conducted raids on caravans, he got money, and he got followers who decided not to be killed when they got raided, and so his army grew. And as such, the revelations he got became more and more militant. And by the time he died, just 10 years later, he had an army of over 100,000 men, and he had conquered all of the Arabian Peninsula and was the first man ever to do so. And here are those verses. Here's an example, Quran 2:106. We bring ones that are better or like it. So the old verses are still valid. And that's important to know too. All the verses in the Quran, they believe, are 100% valid and for all time. And perfect and unchanging. All of those are very critical to understand. But the newer ones abrogate the older ones. So remember I talked about the fact that the Quran was collected in the length of the chapter. Well, it's important to know when a chapter was written, and even when a verse was written, because remember, the newer verses abrogate the older verses. So when someone gives you a verse that's full of peace and love, you need to ask, when was that verse written? And there's other verses afterwards that cancel that one out. Here's a couple examples. 2:256, and you've heard this one, I'm sure. Let there be no compulsion in religion. But if you reject evil and believe in Allah, you've done well. That was abrogated by Quran 9:5. Slay the idolaters and wait for them in every ambush. Here's another happy one. Even if the people of the book wish to turn you back, wish to take you away from Islam, you should forgive and overlook them. That's very generous. However, that was abrogated by 8:12. I, meaning God, Allah, I will cast terror into their hearts. Therefore, you strike off their heads and strike off their fingertips. So here God is commanding the Muslims to behead their enemies. And again, when were they written? Let's take a look at the chronological references. The blue arrows are the happy verses of acceptance and understanding. The red arrows are the verses that demand that Muslims kill and not be generous. The third foundation we're going to look at is lying. There are many different methods for lying, but we're going to talk about three primary ones. In the Quran, it really references a defensive lying. They call it taqiyya, and what it is where a Muslim is in an environment where they feel threatened that if people knew they are Muslim, that they might be injured. So they are allowed to pretend not to be Muslim. They don't have to pray, and they can even take non-believers as friends in a manner that is protective. Because there are other verses like 5:51 that says, do not take disbelievers as your friends. And if you do take a disbeliever as a friend, you are like one of them, which means you're an apostate, which means you should be killed. So Quran 3:28 and others give Muslims authorization to lie to protect themselves. But there are three fundamental times they're allowed to lie. The first one's in battle. Now, for a politician, as we're going to hear in a minute, politics is a battle. So they can lie in politics. The second one is bringing friends together. If two friends are having an argument, I'm allowed to lie to each of them to bring them back and reconcile them. And the third method is with a husband and wife. If I've put on a little weight, my wife tells me, oh, you look great, you look like you've always looked, and it's not true, that's okay, because that's a married couple reconciling each other. But here's some examples. People say that Muhammad never lied. Well, here's two examples, and one of them has a twist. Muhammad said, war is deceit. Remember the first option, battle. This was said after he and his men had promised safety to a local leader and 30 of his men, and when they got halfway to where they were going, Muhammad and his men murdered all 31 of them. And then Muhammad said, war is deceit, because he knew he was going to kill that man when he promised him safety. The second one was when a man had said things that had irritated Muhammad. He asked, who will kill this man for me? Because he's irritated me. A man says, I will kill him, but you're going to have to let me lie so I can get close to him and kill him. And Muhammad said, yes, you may lie to get close to him so you may murder him. And the man did. He went into the man's house, and in front of the man's wife, he murdered him. Much to Muhammad's joy. Here's an example of lying.
يقول شارون عن أبو عمار أنه كذاب بشكل مأساوي، والكثير يعني من السياسيين الذين تعاطوا مع أبو عمار بيقولوا أنه كان يعني يمتاز بالكذب.
طيب هلا الدين بسمح لك تكذبي 3 كذبات، توفقي بين 2. هذا الدين بسمح هيك، توفقي بين 2
المصالحة.
واحد مرته مش حلوه يقول لها أنت أجمل مرة في العالم، والثالثة بالسياسة بدك تكذبي. يعني كان أبو عمار
أنت توافق على
نعم.
هذا الكلام.
نعم.
يعني كان يكذب قدامك.
نعم.
يعني
الأخ أبو عمار كان يقول مثلا لما يطلع الأخ أبو عمار تصير عملية في تل أبيب يطلع يقول الأخ أبو عمار أنا طبعا بعد ضغوطات، وأولهم حق رئيس حسني مبارك يتصل بالأخ أبو عمار يقول له يا أخ أبو عمار اطلع دين، دول حينيلوكم. يقول له يا سيادة الرئيس ما أنا عندي شهداء، دول دمرونا، دول لحمونا. يقول له اطلع دين يا أخ أبو عمار دول حينيلوكم. فيطلع الأخ أبو عمار يدين بطريقته الخاصة أنا ضد القتل المدني. هو مش صحيح.
So here we have the bodyguard for Yasser Arafat, with whom the United States negotiated peace with Israel for over 40 years. And he's confirming that Arafat lied whenever he felt like it, as long as it advanced his cause. Here's another example. That was the 20th century. Let's look at the 21st century. 2 examples of lying in the 21st century. The first one was a reporter, an American reporter who was captured and was held captive in Syria for 2 years by extremists. So when he was finally released, his captors were talking to him and they said, we just got back from being trained by the Americans to fight. And he said, weren't you supposed to be fighting against the extremists? And the response was simple. Oh, that. Yeah, we lied about that. So right now the United States is training terrorists how to fight because we think that they're moderates and they're lying to us. The second example, bridge building. When a Christian or Westerner thinks of bridge building, they think, I come and learn about you, you learn about me, we've enriched ourselves. When an Islamist thinks about bridge building, an Islamist thinks, here's a bridge that lets me bring you to me, and that's as far as it goes. There's 4 basic principles that they believe that prevent a reasonable bridge building experience, and in fact is a foundation of why I encourage no bridge building events to be held in Christian churches. The first one is they believe that everyone is born a Muslim. If you're not a Muslim today, that's because your evil parents tricked you and trained you in the wrong direction, because you were born to be a Muslim. It's your nature to be Muslim. The second one is that Christians are blasphemers because we believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And there are multiple verses for that. The third one is that Muslims aren't allowed to take us as friends. If we can't be friends, then why are we building bridges? In fact, this verse says, If you take somebody as your friend, this is 551 I talked about earlier, and it's reinforced with Bukhari, with what Muhammad said. If a believer, a Muslim, takes a non-Muslim as a friend, they are in essence becoming an unbeliever, and that makes them an apostate. And according to Islamic doctrine, the apostate should be killed. And finally, God does not love unbelievers. So if God doesn't love me, you can't be my friend. I'm a blasphemer, and you think that I was supposed to be a Muslim, but I messed up with my parents. Why am I doing a bridge building event with you? The fourth foundational principle we're going to look at today is killing and conquering for Allah and bringing people out of their unbelief. This is the N, which is a pin I always wear, that symbolizes what a Christian lived when the Islamic State went into Mosul and started kicking Christians out of their homes. We're going to start with a quick video. The ISIL spokesman, if you remember in August of 2014, ISIL, ISIS, the Islamic State, Daesh, all of them mean the exact same thing. None of them are wrong, none of them are negative, they just mean the same thing. But they went in and they slaughtered the Yazidi people by the thousands. They captured the women, took them off as sex slaves, and turned the children either into servant slaves, turned them into Muslims, or they killed them as well. The world was outraged. Listen and read what the Islamic State's spokesman says and how calmly he explains that there was a reason why they did this stuff. And it was to bring people to belief.
الدولة الإسلامية حريصة كل الحرص على توبة أي كافر مهما كان، سواء كان يزيدي أو صليبي أو يهودي. ونحن ما قاتلنا إلا لإخراج الناس من الكفر وإدخالهم من الإسلام، ولكن اليزيدي أبوا إلا أن يقاتلونا، فقاتلناهم بفضل الله، وتم فتح مدينة سنجار بجهود الطيبين والخيرين، يعني مقابل الأمان لهم ونوفرهم كل ما يحتاجونه قدر ما نستطاع، ولكن أبوا إلا أن يقاتلونا. فهذا ما رأيته بأم عينك، فحالهم في الجبال.
Now, the fight could have been avoided. You heard the man say, we tried to avoid the fight, but we couldn't. And here's Sahih Muslim saying, invite them to accept Islam. You'll see that repeatedly. Always before an attack, the Islamists will say, we invite you to join Islam. And if you do, then they'll accept you, and they'll stop fighting you, and they'll bring you in as one of theirs. If you don't accept them, then they've got some basic commands. According to the Quran, 2 different verses have the exact same verbiage. Fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is for Allah. That's pretty simple. God, who revealed the Quran through Gabriel to Muhammad, is clearly telling them they must fight, and the original Arabic frequently said the word kill, not just fight. They are to fight until all religion is for Allah. Pretty cut and dry. Sahih Muslim, Muhammad himself, in fact, Bukhari says roughly the same thing. Muhammad told his followers that he had been commanded by God to fight anyone who did not believe in Islam until all that were left were those who believed that Allah was a monotheistic God. And you'll notice in Bukhari, he adds, they also have to believe that Muhammad was a messenger. Believing in God is not enough. You have to believe that Muhammad was a prophet. God, in fact, himself said, I will send terror. And you are to cut off their heads and their fingers. We talked about this one before. Later on, God tells Muhammad, directs Muhammad, strive hard against the unbelievers and be unyielding. Now, interesting, you'll note it says, and the hypocrites. Well, where'd that come from? To the Islamist, a hypocrite is a Muslim who is not practicing Islam in a sincere enough manner to meet the Islamist requirements. So a person might be a very good Muslim, but if they aren't doing what the Islamist believes that they're supposed to do, which includes fighting because Muhammad was commanded to fight. Remember, if Muhammad did it or said it, you not only should also, but you are commanded to. So if you're not fighting, then you are a hypocrite in their eyes, in the Islamists' eyes. So that's important, hypocrite. Now, people say, but Muhammad never did anything that was violent. Let me give you a couple examples out of the Sunnah. In the Sirah, what Muhammad did, he told one of his men to torture a Jew because he knew that Jew knew where treasure was. And Muhammad wanted that treasure. So he said, torture this man. They staked the man down. They built a fire on his chest. And when he was about to die, without giving up any information, they took him to another Muslim whose brother had been killed in a battle. And that other Muslim had the privilege. What's the word we use? Pleasure. He had the pleasure of cutting off the man's head. In Bukhari, two men had joined Islam, had gone off with a caravan and murdered the other members of the caravan, had tried to steal the goods. They were tracked down, brought back to Muhammad. Muhammad had their arms and their legs cut off and their eyes gouged out and left them in the middle of the desert screaming for help and mercy and water until they died. And finally, when the people of Khaybar fled the city, Muhammad ordered that all the men would be killed and the women and the children would be taken away as slaves. And the women were parceled out to the warriors of Muhammad. Part of this violence and fighting is a phrase you've heard numerous times. Islamists will say, we love death more than you love life. Well, this is the verse that actually comes from Quran 2, 94 to 96. And it basically is God talking to the Jews and telling them, you think you are God's chosen people. Well, if you really think you are special to God, you would love death because if you die, you get to go to heaven to be with God. But clearly because you are sinful and selfish, you love life more than you love death, and that is because you are greedy for life, because you are just wrongdoers. This verse is what is used to get phrases like this. More violence. In January 2015, two men walked into the Charlie Hebdo newspaper office and butchered 10 people. They also then killed 2 police officers. The next day, they killed a few more people. They did so claiming that they were avenging Prophet Muhammad. In the verses I have here, in the Quran, it clearly demonstrates that anyone who offends the Prophet or Muhammad has a terrible doom coming. And in the Sirah and in the Hadith I have listed, there are examples. In one case, a blind man had a slave woman who had given him 2 children he loved very much. But she kept making derogatory statements about Muhammad. So one night while they were lying in bed together, he took a knife and killed her. When they brought the man to Muhammad for judgment, Muhammad, once he learned that the man did it to uphold Muhammad's honor, Muhammad said there is no penalty needed. The same thing happened with another man who killed a Jew by strangling her to death because she was saying bad things about Muhammad. And when Muhammad came back to Mecca as a triumphant leader, he specifically had his men hunt down and kill anyone who had spoken poorly about him, to include 2 young girls who sang satire. So clearly the Charlie Hebdo attack had a precedence with Muhammad. He had set the example to kill like this. Another recent example, in February, a video was released of a Jordanian pilot who had been captured. They put him into a cage, doused him with gas, and burned him to death. Once he had burned to death, he was then buried in rubble. That is consistent with the Quran, in that the Quran talks about retaliation. And the reliance of the traveler actually has sections that talk about how to conduct the retaliation, and it should be of equal value. And so what did they do? A pilot drops a bomb, it burns the people inside the building, and then the building collapses on the people who are dead. So they burned him, and they dropped the building on him, just like he had done to others, in perfect retaliation in accordance with Islamic doctrine. And as an example, in the History of al-Tabari, Volume 10, Abu Bakr, who was the first man who followed Muhammad as a caliph, ordered a man who had become an apostate taken out into the field and burnt. So clearly, when this happened, they were following Islamic doctrine. But those weren't isolated events. Every month, roughly 200 attacks are conducted against civilians, not against the military, against civilians in the name of Allah and then by Islamists. Last month alone, in the month of February 2015, nearly 2,000 people were killed in 23 countries in 230 attacks, which involved 42 suicide bombings. And it covered the globe, to include in Detroit, Michigan, where a man asked two people, "Are you Muslim?" And when they said no, he stabbed them. But doesn't the Quran say, if you kill a man, it's like killing all mankind? Look, here's a verse, Quran 5:32. If you kill a man, it says, if you kill all mankind. I've heard this verse many times. I'll show you in a minute that those little green dots mean a lot. There's stuff that they're leaving out. But let me give you some examples of people who say these things.
In the Bible, we have thou shalt not kill. In the Quran, we have whoever kills another, surely he is killing all of humanity. And whoever saves the life of another, surely he saves the lives of all humanity.
But she's not a leader. She's just a religious person. What do politicians say about this?
Well, why don't you read the part where it says that anyone who takes a life is as if he killed the whole world, and anyone who saves a life is as if he saved the whole world.
The Holy Quran teaches that whoever kills an innocent it is as if he has killed all mankind.
Clearly, they all read the verse, 5:32 that I just showed you. But maybe they didn't read it from the actual Quran, because 5:32 starts out saying, we decreed this for the children of Israel. And in fact, in researching it, I found out in Mishnah 3, written hundreds of years before the Quran, this verse was in there. So Muhammad took this verse straight out of Jewish teachings, but he added a twist. You'll note that now I've got in the middle, or corruption in the earth, or manslaughter. None of them quoted to me corruption in the earth or manslaughter. They just said if you kill someone, it's like killing all mankind. What is corruption in the earth? I will tell you that it means a lot of different things. We'll talk about that in just a second. But let's look at the very next verse. People always say, let's look at verses in context. Well, let's look at this one in context. The very next verse says, the only reward for those who make war on Allah and His messenger or strive after corruption in the land is that they'll be killed or crucified, you have your option, or have your hands and your feet on alternate side cut off. So that doesn't sound as peaceful as what the people just told us. Now, October 2014, Iran actually arrested a man and charged him with spreading corruption on the earth because he was spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. So corruption on the earth really means whatever the Islamist wants it to mean. If you are not helping people to be the best Muslim that the Islamist believes that they should be, you are spreading corruption in the earth. Doesn't matter who you are, and they'll go after you. In fact, here's an example of corruption in the earth. Just this month, March 2015, the Islamic State cut off the hands of 5 men because they were smoking, and they cited 533 that they are doing corruption on the earth. So, once I have conquered the world, I've subjugated people, and they are no longer a threat to me because I have followed Muhammad's rules of fighting until Islam is the religion. what do I do with those whom I have not killed? Well, the Quran gives you three options. Quran 9:29 tells you that Muslims are to fight until people of the book are subjugated and pay the jizya tax. And it's important to note that they feel themselves subdued. And then in the hadith, we learned that what Muhammad told his warriors when they went out fighting was invite them to three courses of action. Invite them to accept Islam. If they won't accept Islam, then make them pay the special tax they call the jizya tax. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if they won't pay the jizya tax, then fight them with God's help. Kill them. So convert, pay a tax, or die. And this started when Muhammad had a Jewish tribe that, instead of being attacked and killed, they came to Muhammad and said, we surrender. Do with us as you will. And he said, you people are farmers. My men cannot farm. You keep farming. We're going to take the best stuff from you now. And everything you earn in the future, we're going to take half. This is the beginning of this foundational truth. Then in 637, Umar conquered a Christian community, very possibly Damascus, and he set up a system of 70 rules that they had to follow. And you see, Umar was the second rightly guided caliph. He lasted for 10 years. And these rules guided and have guided for the last 1,430 years how conquering Muslims treat their subjugated people. Here's some rules. We will not erect, this is the subjugated people talking now, we will not erect or restore any places of worship. We won't prevent a Muslim from resting in our churches. So if a Muslim walks into your house and says, I want to sleep in your bed, you have to let them have it. We will not hang swords on shoulders, and we will not ride on saddles. They cannot rise up in rebellion because they have no arms. We will wear belts around our waist, have the front of our hair cut off, where it will look funny. Again, you're subjugating people, making them feel subdued. And at the very end of our early 70 directives, they say, if we break these promises, you can do with us as if we had rebelled, which means you can kill us. Well, in the reliance of the traveler, Sharia law, in section 11, it talks about non-Muslim subjects in an Islamic state. Note it says the Islamic State had nothing to do with ISIS. This was written in the 1300s. So the minimum non-Muslim poll tax is 4.235 grams of gold, which as of today, March 24th, 2015, is worth $162 a year. So the minimum amount each Muslim will pay is that much. However, the maximum amount is negotiated between the two parties, and clearly the one who has the sword will dictate what that amount is, and typically it's 50%. Now here's some of the rules they did. They have to do distinguished in dress, they have to keep on the side of the street, they can't build new churches, they can't ring the church bells, and they cannot say things that are bad about Allah, the Prophet, or Islam. Again, I'm on a list of other things, but these are things, even in the 1300s, that mirrored what Omar had done. Then just last year, December 23rd, the Islamic State came out and said, they quoted Quran 9:29, which gives you the first reference to the three options, and they said, you cannot worship in public, you cannot have churches fixed or repaired, you can't display your crosses, you can't pray loudly, and you cannot mock Muslims or Islam, and you cannot stop anyone from converting to Islam. So the Islamic State, if you're asking, are the Islamic State and other Islamists Islamic, their rules quote the Quran and follow exactly Islamic law. So what is the long-term goal of all this subjugation? I've got a friend who's going to tell you exactly what they do and what the outcome is going to be.
How much contradiction does the Charter of the United Nations and Islam have? We take what Abdullah ibn Abbas he said, because he is Sahabi, from the greatest of the Mufassirin. He said to take jizya from the Ahlul Kitab. Completely contradicts, my dear brothers, the articles of the United Nations. Article 2, paragraph 1 says the organization is based on principle of sovereignty and of equality to all of its members. Equality to all of its members. Is there such a thing in Islam? Is there equality of faith? If we look to one hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the authority of Abu Hurairah, Sahih Muslim. So no Sunni Muslim can really argue against Sahih Muslim or Sahih Bukhari. Rasulullah said, don't greet the Jews and the Christians before they greet you, and when you meet any of them on the roads, force them to go on the narrow side of it. And Imam Malik, he said the same thing as well. In fact, Umar ibn Khattab, who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that if there was to be another Nabi after me, it would be Umar ibn Khattab in his own charter, not charter of the United Nations, in his charter with the people of Sham, with those Christians of Sham, in his charter was, Kafir and Muslim, they're not allowed to wear the same clothes as one another. If the Muslim, he comes out on the day of Eid and he sees Kafir with nice clothes, the Kafir has to take his clothes off and give it to the Muslims. The Kafir, when he walks inside the street, he has to wear a red belt around his neck, and he has to have his forehead shaved, and he has to wear two shoes which are different from one another. He's not allowed to, and he's not allowed to walk on the pavement. He has to walk in the middle of the road, and he has to ride on a mule. And that's only for the adults, not for the children. And you can see how Islam would make the child become a Muslim. The kafir, or the child growing up in a state of kufr, he will turn to Islam. Why? Because the child will be walking along with his dad. He said, Dad, yeah, why you got your forehead shaved? I don't know whether these Muslims, they make me do it. Why you got to walk? Why can't you ride the animal? Like the Muslims, they ride the animal like this. Why are you walking with both legs dangling on the side of the donkey? Why is it every time the Muslim comes to you, he asks you for your clothes, you give it? Why is it every time he tells you to get down from the horse, you have to take it? And not only that, he said the kuffar, they can have their churches. They can have their churches, but they're not allowed to ring the bell. And if a Muslim, he's walking by, let's say for example, a Muslim's been on Edgware Road for example. He's had some nice shisha, some nice steak, no hubble bubble, we don't deal with anything like that. And he's walking along and he's rubbing his belly and he's like, oh man, I don't want to upset my wife tonight. What he can do, he can go to the church, knock on the door, John, let me in. Okay, no problem. John has to put up Abdul Ghafoor for the night. Abdul Ghafoor with his big belly, having his nice kebab, John has to open up the church and he has to go there and sleep there nice and comfortable and say, all right, John, thank you, and then carry on going early in the morning. Which wife is going to live with John under that type of circumstances? What kind of dishonoring is this for me to live with John and Abdul Ghafoor comes every Friday night and sleeps in our bed as well? Of course. Because sunnah is to look after the guest, isn't it? I can't make you sleep on my floor if you can't. You're a Muslim, by the way. So what about when Abdul Ghafoor goes to John's house? John, sleep on the floor, and I'll sleep on the bed. What's going to happen? Tracy's going to be on the floor thinking, my husband, he's got a forehead shaved, and this one, look to this one, Khattab, mashallah. Which one's more attractive? We're not gay, but I'm just saying. A man with his forehead shaved and one belt around his neck and two different colored shoes, or Amir Khattab. Amir Khattab, we're talking about here now, with that nice Chechen hat, big beard, a bit to the side, yeah? And he's got the badges there, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, yeah? And he's got a big gun, and he's got a big camouflage jacket on, nice boots, gloves as well. Even if he's got a couple of fingers missing, still looks attractive, yeah? What's Tracy going to do? John's in for a problem. He just let him in for a kebab, he lost his own wife as well. So everyone's going to become Muslim. That is, my dear brothers, the Islamic State.
And my dear brothers, that is how the Christian nations of Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey are all now 95 to 99% Muslim. So how does this work today? Caliph Ibrahim I, who by the way has a PhD in Islamic studies. So if somebody knows the Islamic doctrine, it would be this gentleman. He also is a descendant of the tribe of Muhammad, which gives him some legitimacy. And his family has a religious creed in Salafi and Wahhabi principles, which simply means they believe that Muslims should practice Islam the way it was done when Muhammad and his companions walked the earth. So we're going to show you a couple quick videos from the speech he gave on the 4th of July, right after he had announced he's the new caliph of a caliphate. The first one is going to talk about Muhammad preparing his men for war, and then conquest.
أيها المسلمون، إن بلوغ رمضان نعمة عظيمة وفضل كبير من الله تعالى. شهر يقام فيه سوق الجهاد، فكان صلى الله عليه وسلم يعقد فيه الألوية ويجيش الجيوش لمقاتلة أعداء الله لمجاهدة المشركين فاغتنموا هذا الشهر الكريم يا عباد الله في طاعة الله ففيه تضاعف الأجور وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون.
Many people say that it's against Islam to fight during Ramadan. Well, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to do what Muhammad did. What did Muhammad do? On at least 3 occasions, Muhammad fought major wars during Ramadan. The Battle of Badr was the first battle fought by Muhammad in a large scale. It was our largest victory. And then in 627, he fought the Battle of the Trench, after which he had 800 Jewish men lined up in front of him and beheaded in small groups with his young bride sitting by his side. And then later on, he trained his men. So Muhammad did it. And if Muhammad did it, so should modern Islamists. Now, he taught us season month. And in the Quran, on numerous occasions, God told Muhammad, when they ask you about fighting in the prohibited month, tell them that tumult and oppression are worse than slaughter. So since anyone stopping me from becoming the Muslim I'm supposed to be, that's worse than if I kill them. So I should kill them. And so slaughter is authorized during Ramadan. And finally, he mentioned reward is doubled. And it says believers who are unhurt and sit behind are not equal to those who fight. Clearly, those who fight are better than those who do not fight, according to God, Allah. And a whole degree higher are they preferred.
فهذا قوام الدين كتاب يهدي وسيف ينصر وإن إخوانكم المجاهدين قد من الله تبارك وتعالى عليهم بنصر وفتح ومكن لهم بعد سنين طويلة من الجهاد والصبر ومجالدة أعداء الله ووفقهم ومكنهم لتحقيق غايتهم.
Some important things were said here. First, we learned that Allah provided guidance and a religion of truth, that they may conquer, read that, Quran 61:9, that he may make it conqueror of all religion. Conqueror of all religion. Bukhari, as apostles said, remember that paradise is under the shades of swords. This is right before battle. He wanted his men to fight, because if you fight and die, you get to go to paradise. It's under the shade of swords. And finally he said, you will conquer. Caliph Ibrahim mentioned conquering. Here's in Muslim, which, as our last speaker said, you cannot argue with Muslim or Bukhari. You will attack Arabia, and you will conquer it. Then you will attack Persia, you will conquer it. Then you will attack Rome, and Allah will make you conquer it. Now, to date, Islam has conquered Arabia, and they have conquered Persia. They have yet to conquer Rome. But they knew they were supposed to try. So what did they do? What did the first generation who knew what Muhammad was like, what did they do? Well, here, in the first 10 years of his warring years, Muhammad conquered the Arabian Peninsula. 15 years later, at the 25-year mark, they conquered from Tunisia all the way into Pakistan and Afghanistan. In the next 75 years, by the 100-year mark, they had conquered all the way through most of Spain, into Uzbekistan and Pakistan, and up into the Caucasus. Clearly, those who followed Muhammad knew he intended for them to conquer, not just talk. But what does that mean today? What does Rome mean?
لا يستفزون إن دولة الخلافة عائدة وإن الإسلام سوف يعود ليحكم الأرض ونفتح روما بإذن الله عز وجل. هنا هو محور الحرب على دولة الخلافة أنها تحمل مشروع خلافة لفتح الأرض من الشام من هنا من الشام الرأس والعراق ومصر الجناحان. هنا تبدأ الفتوحات وهنا رأس الأرض وهنا رأس الدنيا ومن هنا تفتح الدنيا.
Rome today is A, literally Rome, because they want to conquer literal Rome, and B, the Western world. So based on these foundations we've talked about, what are Islamists doing in the world today?
I will ask you, everyone in the room, how many of you are normal Muslims. You're not extremists. You're not radical. Just normal Sunni Muslims. Please raise your hands. Everybody, mashallah. Subhanallah. Okay, take down your hands again. How many of you agree that men and women should sit separate? Please raise your hands. Everyone agree. Everyone agree. Brothers and sisters. Subhanallah. So it's not just these radical sheikhs then. Allahu Akbar. Next question. How many of you agree that the punishments described in the Quran and the Sunnah, whether it is death, whether it is stoning for adultery, whatever it is, if it is from Allah and His Messenger, that is the best punishment ever possible for humankind. And that is what we should apply in the world. Who agrees with that? Allahu Akbar. Are you all radical extremists? Subhanallah.
So, here we have people who are, to everyone else, moderate Muslims, but they fit my definition of Islamists because they wish for their rule to include stoning and other decrees in the Islamic law, in Sharia law, to be applied across the world. And that is the best thing for the world. These people were in Norway with this theory. And they're teaching the young. Every year, Hamas, which runs the government in Gaza, has a summer camp in January for the kids. When I was a kid, I went to summer camp, went hiking, and I learned how to shoot arrows. They learned some different things. And this year's keynote speaker was the founder of Hamas. And he quoted Quranic verses, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. And against them, make ready your strength, including the steeds of war.
إنهم اليوم يتدربون في سبيل الله انسجاما مع أمره تعالى لهم وأعدوا لهم ما استطعتم من قوة ومن رباط الخيل قال لهم وقتلوهم حيث ثقفتموهم قاتلوا ويقاتلون ويعدون أنفسهم لكل فلسطين حتى نستطيع أن نحقق غايتنا.
Notice he finished with, until we accomplish our goal, which is exactly what Caliph Ibrahim in Iraq said. Clearly, there's a common doctrine involved. But, unfortunately for us, this belief that Islam should dominate isn't limited to overseas. It's coming home to roost in the United States of America.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, guide the leaders of this nation who have been given a great responsibility in worldly affairs. Guide them and grant them righteousness and wisdom.
Siraj Wahhaj, a sometime leader and prominent speaker at events hosted by American groups connected with the Muslim Brotherhood, was chosen to give the first Muslim invocation before Congress in 1991. Here's Wahhaj in front of his own congregation long before his congressional appearance.
Every day they would go to school and they put an American flag in front of these little babies, Muslim babies. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Bullshit!
Here he is after his congressional appearance.
I want to defend this country. You know what this country is? It's a garbage can. It's filthy. Filthy and sick.
I find that there are only two things which are open to our movements. Ballot or bullet, nothing in between.
Democracy, the black people's freedom. No, we don't want to democratize Islam. We want to Islamize democracy.
Our job is to change the Constitution of America.
This last speaker won a Lifetime Achievement Award from CARE last year. They want to change our system of government. And some of them even have a timeline when they want it done.
Islam is coming to America not through violence. It's coming to America the same way Christianity came to Rome. In fact, on our website, we talk about the Islamic State of North America by 2050.
2050. They have a plan. But it's not just leaders. Here's a man who was simply a construction worker in the Twin Towers. He was hailed in 2010 as a model citizen. He was going to listen to Suraj Wahaj speak and was interviewed by a conservative.
Suraj Wahaj said, listen, if Muslims were more clever politically, they would take over the United States and replace its constitutional government. This is the man you're seeing tonight.
Listen, I don't have a problem with that.
You don't have a problem with that?
Oh, no, I don't have
So you would like to shoot Sharia law in place of the Constitution?
By all means.
Let me ask you this, though, since you brought up Sharia law. Under Sharia law, the Book of Justice 12:2 calls for stoning of any adulterer.
I don't have a problem with that.
Do you have a problem with killing apostates or stoning apostates?
It all depends on what look at. You have to go to the footnotes on apostate.
Yes.
When apostate turns his back on Islam,
yes, sir,
and becomes an enemy to Islam, then yes.
You have to kill him?
Yes,
and you would like to see that law in America?
By all means. And let me tell you something. Let me say this in reference to
What is your
Sharia
name, sir? Do you mind me asking? I mean, because we're talking with you. I mean, my name's Randy McDaniel, by the way.
My name is Sinclair.
Sinclair
Hijazi. Let me tell you something about Sharia law. If we had Sharia law in this country,
yes, sir,
it would prevent prostitution.
How does it prevent prostitution? By what means?
Because the man can marry more than one wife. Look at the Mormons.
But what's the penalty for prostitution?
The penalty for prostitution is the woman is
she stoned?
That's right, she's stoned, but the man they let the man off free.
Okay, that's under Sharia law.
That's right.
Okay.
Not a radical leader, just an electrician, but he believes Sharia law as it is in Islamic doctrine.
Stop calling them suicide bombers.
Brotherhood legacy groups, such as the Muslim Students Association, host speakers who indoctrinate students on campuses around the country.
Against the people who love death more than you love life. You in trouble, man. You in serious trouble.
Amir Abdel Malik Ali speaks in front of thousands of students every year. Here he weaves the Brotherhood motto into a Pledge of Allegiance at UCLA, with hundreds of students enthusiastically repeating the chant in response.
We will end with the Pledge of Allegiance. And so you will repeat after me, inshallah. Allah is my Lord. Islam is my life. The Quran is my guide. The Sunnah is my practice. Jihad is my spirit. Righteousness is my character. And paradise is my goal. For I enjoin what is right. I forbid what is wrong. I will fight against oppression. And I will die to establish Islam. Assalamu alaikum.
And if you have friends who are Muslim, but they don't believe in Islamist philosophies, they just want to be friends and want to live in America peacefully. The problem with that is Islamists consider them hypocrites now, and we're going to have to kill them. So remember, the Islamists believe they're doing what Muhammad ordered, and they're following Muhammad's example. They're obeying God by doing what they're doing. They will fight to the last man's death because they love death more than you love life. They will join militaries, lie, and kill Americans. They will make you think they're your friend and eventually undermine you. And they are teaching their children to hate Jews and Christians, anyone who's not a Muslim. This battle will be fought by my grandchildren's grandchildren. This is a never-ending battle. It is incumbent upon you and I to learn Islamic doctrine, not just the Quran, the whole Islamic doctrine, and understand what it is that's motivating them. So when someone tries to tell us that we do not know what we are talking about, we can quote to them the Islamic scriptures and bring others to understand the threat we face. Because this is the midterm objective of the Islamists. Various caliphates all united under one Islam. Thank you.